The fuse has been lit on digital media.
And possibly it's just a matter of time before it explodes.
How big a bang? How many digital companies are beyond saving?
Today, the media meltdown, a special future-forward look into the abyss.
I'm Stephen Rosenbaum.
And I'm Gene DeRose, and this is Future Forward. Let's launch. Hey, Steve.
Hey, how are you? You know, we promised that this would not be a grim and sad podcast, but rather an honest exploration of this smoking hole in the ground and what we're going to do about it. We're going to do 3 chapters today. We're going to start with Mike, because Mike is the thing everyone is talking about of the moment. Then we're going to get into this second chapter, is everyone really for sale? And then last but not least, remembering AOL, a little bit backward, a little bit forward. And then if we have a little time, there's a Facebook video with Andrew Anker we're going to try and take a look at. But let's just start right up at the top and begin with Mike, because really that is where this show began. You know, the headline in the Columbia Journalism Review: Mike shuts down, a victim of management hubris and Facebook's pivot to video. I like CJR, but I think that's an unfair way to characterize this story. I really do.
It's a little simplistic and newsy too. You know, I mean, I'm not really sure, and I know they do a little bit of that, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I'm not sure anyone thinks the pivot to video. You just can't say that it's not as simple as that.
All right, so here's what I know from a little bit of personal investigation that I did. First of all, Mike has been, you know, on some version of life support for at least a year.
And let's just, so people that might not know, you know, Mike has been a reasonably successful, if at the very least, high profile kind of a vertical media company in the digital world, focused mostly on millennials. You know, at some point, gosh, I think they raised over $50 million collectively. But starting a year-ish ago, it started to not look so good. So,
and at one point they had a valuation of $100 million.
Correct.
Yep. You know, it didn't make its way to my feeds that often, but Mike was doing what all of these digital media startups was doing, which was using the platforms to generate the traffic, but hoping that eventually they could move people off of YouTube or Facebook and onto their proprietary site so that they could own the audience.
Right. And let's put a pin in that, because is that ever going to be a good idea is something that maybe in some ways this whole episode is about. But let's go on with Mike for now.
So they announced they were shutting down, I don't know, whatever it is now, 4 or 5 days ago. They let everybody go. They sold for $5 million.
Right. And parts and the founders are the only ones that are retained, going to Bustle, which, you know, look, that's interesting. Bustle is itself a kind of a roll up of millennial women, you know, but more than anything, it's targeted at women. So, you know, pin number 2 is, can any digital content business survive other than being targeted at women? But it's just an odd, you know, way in which it fell out, and, you know, they let more than 60 to 80 editorial people are now out on the street, which always sucks.
Any sense of like what? So why management hubris? Why does CJR get to say that?
Well, if anyone reads the article, you can see. I mean, what's annoying is that they kind of say it without a lot of evidence. I do think there is a little bit of that. You know, there's an adage that I don't necessarily believe, you know, it sometimes seems to be true, which is sometimes you can raise too much money, and when you raise too much money, you try to do too many things. You get a little bit out of your feet, and you fly too close to the sun. You know, you spend too much, you don't manage it well. Maybe not. I'm not sure it's ever too much money to spend. I do feel like they are to blame for having spent $50 or $60 million and not having locked in a revenue model or done something a little more unique than a certain type of content, right? You got to either become really good the way BuzzFeed and others have been with data or with figuring out, how to do an affiliate model or partner with other people. I'm just not sure what they did other than get bigger.
So, here's, I think, the thing about, let's just take a minute and really have at this phrase pivot to video.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's the equivalent of a women's dress shop saying they're pivoting to flowers or to burritos. Like, there's just, like, if you're a website that's a text-based, you're authors, you've got a voice, you've got a graphic style, you've got a look and feel, and you want to overnight invent yourself as a video product. I just, there's no evidence that ever works for anybody.
No, you're right. And it's because the significance of it is a different thing. It's not like pivoting, from op-ed to feature stories or something.
Exactly right.
In the context of writing journalism. And, which is not to say there's not a pivot there. It's just that, it has to be a gradual and an exploration-based thing and something that, look, what I admire about you is, video and video journalism from an end-to-end, and importantly, from a production and creative back office point of view. And if you don't have those skill sets, you better be partnering so that you can do it, or be big enough, like the New York Times, that you can make a $10 million effort, and do it well. Not that they have, but the whole idea, that's maybe where there is hubris in this. Whereas I would just say, because I believe there is opportunity in pivoting for these guys. In fact, they must, to a certain extent, diversify, because good writing and good communications, and if these people are good talking heads when they go on CNN, there is a video opportunity there. It's just a question of not being that simple.
So without knowing what their burn rate is, I will say this, clearly they had done a deal with Facebook, and Facebook was buying a show from them from Facebook Watch. And Facebook made a decision to pull the plug on the second season of it. Let's assume that was, it was no doubt millions of dollars, right?
Yep. Well, I would say $millions of dollars. It might not have been a gigantic amount, but it might have been enough to say that at least that was profitable and we can move on from there. I wouldn't want to hazard a guess, but probably in its initial stages, much like YouTube about 7 or 8 years ago, they would throw some dumb money at people before they realized, where it should be best spent. But either way, it didn't work because I'm not sure I know anyone that was aware of what they were even doing. It didn't register anywhere.
All right. But this is a good moment to transition to the next chapter in the story, which is everyone's for sale. We're reading about this more and more, and the Hive headline from Vanity Fair was, "A generation of digital media darlings prepares for a frigid winter." Does that mean it thaws in the spring? That would be overly optimistic, I think.
Yeah, and I just don't.
More like nuclear winter.
Well, right. Are we in 2001 and the world in some ways goes away for a few years? I don't think it's anything like that. It is about the sustainability of some of these companies as independent businesses, and about whether audience translates to business model. So, the winter part, let's just not oversell it. The argument partly is, should they roll up because scale matters? We're gonna maybe visit something at the very end with Tim Armstrong's final farewell. And I mention it only because even with crappy properties, he managed to always build a business out of taking all these things and creating a kind of an ad network around it. And there's some sense in which you can at least squeeze some blood out of the rock if you've got scale, which is clearly what Bustle is doing. And can all these other guys get together?
So let's talk about the Jonah Peretti article, proposal, treatise, concept, call it what you will. I mean, you and I both read it kind of in parallel. Like, what was your immediate reaction?
Well, I want to just do 15 seconds of just the BuzzFeed to date. Jonah Peretti was one of the founders and principals at Huffington Post. And out of that, a rib was pulled where, as a data-centric guy, he thought, is it possible that a bot, looking at trends on the internet could be a better way to generate the right stories to cover and do a lot? And then can you get that stuff out? It's been a sensation over several years. And they over $1 billion in valuation, $100+ million in raising money. They hit a wall a year and a half ago when suddenly their ad numbers were way below. Now, I want to say it's important to say that because here's the thing. They did a great job by saying, fuck the mothership. We want to be seen by people. And so they figured out a way to make sure what they did was out there on Twitter, on Pinterest, on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. Of course, you can't charge or make much money on ads there unless you're hosting the stuff themselves. So they didn't crack the code on that part of it. Here we are a year and a half later, and apparently the boy genius is looking at the ad and the revenue side. And that's what this article is about. He kind of sort of admits almost, or the article does, the code hasn't been cracked yet, but they're working on it. I mean, do you have a sense of what they're doing and whether it would work? They're selling things. They're doing affiliate.
So
they have banner ads.
At the risk of using an analogy that I've used before, if I wanted to own the biggest hot dog stand in New York, I could own that tomorrow. I would go to the busiest street corner and I would sell hot dogs for a dime. And I would have line, and even though it only cost $2 to buy a hot dog, people would line up for hours waiting for my 10-cent hot dogs. I would be the biggest hot dog stand in New York literally overnight. Now, presumably the hot dogs don't cost me $2, but they probably cost me 35 cents, 40 cents with the bun. Plus I got to have a license and I got to hire somebody to stand there. So maybe all in the net cost to me is 60 cents. So if I'm losing 50 cents on every single hot dog, there's only so far you can afford to do that before your investors say, hey, we know we gave you $100 million and you're giving away a hot dog. So to me, while I understand the decision to go platform independent and be not have a homepage, but get all your audience from Facebook and YouTube, net, I think that live by the sword, die by the sword. I mean,
yeah, you're introducing though a thing that is part of this, because if we're talking about media, content generating companies, and not talking about the pure video ones that can just keep going to Netflix and Amazon, should it be charged for? Because I know that you didn't mean that explicitly. You were just talking about home.
Oh no, I'm fine with that question. Let's go there.
And here's and I'll put my stake in the ground because I'm not even sure I believe it, but I felt this is only thing has been proven by the data now for 20 years, which is for generalized consumer content and vertical consumer content, you can't charge. It just doesn't make sense unless it's highly specialized and highly expensive. I still don't believe that a for pay model is going to work. You're hiding yourself. You're missing a chance to market, and there's so many complex versions of advertising, but it requires a different expertise. Anyway, I'll stop.
So we're seeing more and more paywalls. That is one response to this nuclear winter. I mean, Business Insider now has a paywall. Essentially, everything you touch is behind a paywall. Dow Jones, Wall Street Journal has had a paywall successfully.
Always.
New York Times' paywall seems to get a little tighter every day. Washington Post has a paywall. The question is, net, what is a consumer tolerance for these? So, to me, micropayments was always going to be different than subscription, and micropayments hasn't happened.
Micropayments hasn't happened. There isn't enough collective there for everyone to get together and say, let's all do something wherein we're all part of the same thing, and I'm buying $20 a week of this, and I can spend it in a bunch of different people don't want to be bothered with that noise, and it doesn't work from a business point of view. I what I really wish in a way was that there was almost and this is heresy, but I wish there was a kind of a cable model, a carriage fees model for getting stuff on Facebook or prominent display in some of the other places, but it doesn't work either. They're not going to pay for that stuff.
So let's go back to the Jonah article for a second, because he the thesis, he essentially said the only way we're all going to survive is if we do a kind of a mega roll up, right? And he was suggesting that BuzzFeed and Vice and Vox and who else? There were a couple of others.
Refinery,
right?
And what's the other one? But there's only one or two others in that main category.
Group 9 Media was the other one.
Right, Group 9. And again, really, to do the Tim Armstrong model. I don't think they're doing that so that they are going to charge. They're doing that because then they would have scale in selling ads across these platforms. And in cross marketing and kind of having a perpetual motion machine of traffic. But, and by the way, I believe that that's true. And actually, I believe it's kind of an inevitability. I think two things. One, they eventually just end up like a New York Times kind of massive content creation company that has a whole different set of problems that don't make them unicornish, just make them like maybe they can manage their way, but never be immensely profitable or whatever. But the worst part is that, is there ever going to be a spot for sustainable, independent, content? It's in some ways, we thought this was always going to be the better version than what happened with magazines and cable TV and zines, where those emerged. And they said, hey, look, those emerged in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and those were a big deal. But none of them made possibly the roll up of the cable companies made sense. But it didn't work for the print guys. And yet, as consumers, those were glory days for independent reading. It just, it's really hard to know what the answer is going to be. And I can return to advertising innovation and the big guys understanding it's in their interest to help this stuff. I have another theory I'll just throw out there, and I'll shut up for a second, which is that part of the reason there's so much crap and dreck in the main news feeds is that the big guys can't afford to have a presence there anymore, the more dependable journalists. And so you're left having a lot of crap getting traded around, which is,
I hadn't read until I just pulled it up, the subhead on the New York Times Jonah Peretti article. It said that the companies could merge with other online publishers in order to negotiate better terms with tech platforms like Facebook. Ha!
That sounds like, Time Inc., cable companies, negotiating with Comcast on must-carry fees.
Yeah, that seems to me like an unlikely outcome.
Let me ask you a question. We're really talking about, even though they dabble or have a lot of video, we're talking about largely print-based journalists filing stories kinds of properties, right? I mean, it's not the same. I mean, maybe Vice is a different one, or Cheddar, but I think it's a different ball of wax if you're a video production property.
Yes, I would say so.
Maybe different problems, but
by the way, the most insightful article about the status of digital media is actually surprisingly on Breitbart.
Breitbart, and by the way, the Breitbart one sort of skins and recasts the Vanity Fair article, which is a good 50,000-foot view, asking some tough questions about consolidation. But I don't know. Yeah, if I agree with you, the Breitbart is a little look at these guys, and they lump together, as progressive or liberal, the ones that aren't conservative, like, since when is BuzzFeed or Mike, liberal properties?
Yeah, fair enough. So the nuclear winter version, the nuclear winter version of this, I want to now, just so we have time to do it, let's go to chapter 3 and talk about AOL.
Let me just ask you one last question, because I just want I do think that you and I are in different places a little bit about this. I'm skeptical that you can move very far off of for pay and paywalls and stuff, and you believe that's the way they have to crack the code, kind of somehow. You got to pay for your content.
I think that advertising has consistently and without much complexity said to the market, we pay for audiences at scale. We pay a CPM. We don't value quality. We don't value niche. We don't value engagement or any of these. Well, we do value engagement, but net, we want large numbers of people watching a thing.
Well, then I think that's a mistake of alignment, because it's certainly true. Podcast to me is the example of something that has found a place where smaller, highly targeted audience and a sponsorship model is generating some pretty crazy revenues. Current company excluded for now. We're going to get there, but I mean, you know what I mean? I totally delivering on specialization.
So I couldn't disagree with you more.
Right.
When I couldn't disagree with you more. When I listen to podcasts and it's an ad for King's Fishmonger Food Market, and it's the CNN, network. Like, no, I don't think. Well, let's save podcasting for another day. But I don't know anybody getting rich in the podcasting space. I know what those ads cost.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, all right. Well, we'll have to get on that.
All right.
Let's move on.
So Tim Armstrong rolls into AOL, and he's going to buy everything in sight. And he buys Flickr, and he buys Yahoo, and he buys Tumblr, where I guess Yahoo buys Tumblr and Tim buys Yahoo. But net, his strategy, which he was pretty public about, is advertising agencies want to buy audience at scale. They don't want to make 3 phone calls when they can make 1. I'm going to scoop up all these platforms, put it into a consistent ad package, and I'm going to win. So essentially, AOL, the purchase would be Google, Facebook, AOL.
Yep.
Now he's leaving.
And they're abandoning, by most accounts, the content and ads approach for more of a network infrastructure. We're a telco kind of strategy, which is kind of astonishing, because a lot of energy was spent on that and a lot of valuations. Look, I believe that stuff does work from a revenue model, but it may not be as sustainable, and it yields dreck. It usually invites dreck on the content ends and yields, the kind of people that will buy cheap mass ads, advertisers.
So Verizon, Tim hasn't said anything publicly. He's not going anywhere. I think he probably wanted to be CEO of Verizon and then didn't get the job.
I think that's part of it, yes.
And that they made a strategy decision that Verizon was, I guess, not a content company.
Right. And part of that, I think, is separate from A, no CEO of the mothership. B, it didn't look like there was no decision to make a nested holding company potential spin out of Oath. It just isn't that big. It isn't that big of a deal. They don't care enough about it. The content and ad network part.
So the Ad Exchanger summarizes a Wall Street Journal article and says that this is going to mean big changes for properties like Huffington Post.
They may have to buy back their independence if that's what they want to do, because they're lost.
Who would buy that?
No, they would have to do like what worked for Reddit. Reddit bought itself out from under Condé Nast. Is that who bought them? Yeah.
Yeah, that's not true.
What's not true?
I know the story you're referring to.
I know the story pretty well too, but what is it that's not true?
So Advance essentially spun Reddit out as a standalone, but they're still the controlling shareholders. No one paid money to Advance to get the equity back.
Oh, I know that. Right.
But
I'm not sure they control it anymore. I think they just didn't have any interest in it. Anyway, that's a good cover also.
Yeah. We'll have this offline, and then we'll come back around because we may know Virgin. All right. So net, when Verizon says we're done with the ad business and we're going to put all of our properties out for fire sale, I mean that's going to be the end of the world as we know it, right?
It's going to be crazy. I mean, it'll be very interesting to see what that means.
And then, as a sidebar, but not entirely a sidebar, what do you make of the Tumblr banning porn thing?
Well, look, at this point, it's amusing that they would even do that. It should have been done when Marissa Mayer was still controlling it, because under the auspice of an innovator that would invest or want to make it, a centerpiece of something, we don't even think about it this way, but Tumblr was Squarespace and Wix before there was Squarespace and Wix, and they always had that opportunity, and it's become a unformed kind of nothing, even though it has its own niche place. And honestly, it's still one of the more elegant, easiest ways to publish content for non-tech people. So it's a shame, but I think it's going to be an irrelevance on an irrelevance, and it's just going to slowly go away.
All right. So last but not least, because we just have a few minutes left, I want to just share with the audience this Andrew Anker video. So Andrew Anker is a legend. He's been around a long time. He's done a bunch of great startups. He was at Wired early on. And he was at Facebook for a relatively short amount of time, 2 years, a little more than 2 years, but has ended up being kind of the only person willing to speak publicly with some honesty and authenticity about what happened at Facebook. This is an hour and 43-minute interview with the raw interview that he did for PBS Frontline. It's absolutely worth a read or a view. But I wanted to say about one scene in particular that I found really telling. Andrew says, and I think it's accurate, that tech companies, when you make the decision to build your tech company on another platform, you go in with your eyes wide open. You know Microsoft is going to change it up. You know that the code base is going to, developers are used to having kind of API level changes in their relationships with platforms. Media companies kind of got, in the way he tells the story, got punched in the face because they weren't expecting Facebook to keep changing everything all the time.
They didn't even know that was a thing. They really didn't even know that was a thing. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And, they would come into work one morning and a feature that had been there the night before was gone. Right.
And by the way, advertisers in those companies did kind of know that was a thing, but had no ability to manage or grapple with it, whether that meant it screwed their revenues or it meant it screwed their customer acquisition. I completely think that's very obvious, but not noted enough. You're right, as it relates to traditional media guys.
So here's where we are, kind of just to bring things back full circle. There is no stable economic infrastructure for startup content companies today. And there isn't going to be in the near future. No one's coming in on a white horse to save them. Apple's not going to push a button and turn on a fire hose of revenue. Google's not going to turn on a fire hose of publisher revenue. Facebook's not and it's kind of what Andrew says in between the lines is, they could give a shit. They're businesses that, content's great on the Facebook platform, but they've got no moral or political or ideological responsibility to be the content platform of the future. The content kind of came to them. They shared it. They share it differently. They're playing with Watch now to do some video stuff. But there's no one sitting around internally going, we owe it to democracy or the media or thought to do this. You know, they're just not. They're.
Yeah, look, I think it's a brilliant point, and I thought of something that maybe is, at least from my side, you know, a kind of a good coda to this, which is that, you know, original content, there's an entropy that does not mesh with the VC and startup model in original content. It doesn't, you know, there's not a value or an audience to go mass and scale, you know. And the problem with startups, because I've watched this over the last 15 years, no matter what kind of app or service you had, it used to be that when you got your 25,000 users, you were off and running. Today, oh my gosh, it's several 100,000, if not 1 million users before you're ready for your Series A. And that even doesn't compute in the world of media and written media. You know, you should be able to live forever and have a nice, profitable, maybe it's that these are almost the equivalent of agencies, you know, very profitable, live forever as long as you're not forced to grow. But like, why shouldn't an 80,000, you know, why shouldn't an 80,000 customer be profitable to the end of time? Well, partly because they're supposed to be on their way to 500,000. And maybe that has something to do with the podcast argument a little bit, because those things don't have to be that big to make at least so much, whether you believe it or not. That's like a Jim Belushi thing.
And with that, we are out of time because the dog's like, time to go. Hey,
Oh, no.
doggy.
We'll
All
get
right.
to all this stuff, though, in future weeks. And I think this is going to be the biggest issue of 2019.
I agree. The long winter ahead. And have an excellent week. Nice to see you. Nice to see your dog. We'll see you next week.
Bye, Charlie.
Bye.